Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're marking a somber anniversary, 1 year since the attacks on Israel on October 7th, 2023.
Yeah, a day that really shook the world.
Absolutely. And, with everything that's happened in the past year, we wanted to take a closer look at how one city in particular is dealing with the aftermath.
Okay.
We're focusing on Berlin, Germany, and how this global event is playing out on a local level.
Interesting choice.
Yeah, there's this thought-provoking blog post we came across, The Hidden Truth About Berlin's Protests 1 year after October 7th.
Hmm.
It really gets into, the different perspectives and challenges that have emerged in Berlin since the attacks.
And Berlin has, historically, a kind of complex relationship with both Israel and Palestine.
Right, exactly. So going into this deep dive, we were really curious to see what the blog uncovered about how the city is grappling with these tensions.
Makes sense.
One of the first things that jumped out at us was this idea that since October 7th, there's been a noticeable rise in anti-Semitism in Berlin.
Oh, wow.
And it's not just limited to extremist groups or anything.
Right.
The blog post argues that it's becoming more mainstream, kind of seeping into everyday conversations and attitudes.
That's pretty worrying.
It is. And, the post actually quotes a Palestinian protester who talks about how this rise in anti-Semitism is making it really difficult to peacefully protest for Palestinian rights.
So it's like creating this really difficult environment where it's hard to have those crucial conversations about human rights and justice.
Exactly. And that's where the blog post introduces us to Jack Shaila.
Okay.
She's a Palestinian woman living in Berlin, but what makes her story even more complex is that she's stateless.
Stateless.
Yeah, so she's not a citizen of any country.
Wow. I can only imagine the challenges that come with that.
It's huge.
Mhm.
She talks in the blog about constantly facing bureaucratic hurdles, being denied basic services. It's really tough.
And then on top of that, trying to navigate her identity and place in all of this.
Absolutely. But despite all of that, she's incredibly determined to speak out for peace and coexistence, even with this rise in anti-Semitism making things so difficult.
That's pretty amazing given everything she's up against.
It is. And, her story really highlights how important it is to look beyond the headlines and the political rhetoric.
Yeah, to see the human stories that are often hidden within these larger conflicts.
Exactly. But, it's not just Jacken's story that sheds light on the complexities of identity in Berlin right now.
Okay, who else does the blog feature?
The blog also introduces us to Maya Volberg, an Israeli woman who's been living in Berlin for 7 years.
Hmm.
And she describes how, after October 7th, life just felt like it completely stopped.
I can understand that. It must have been a huge shock.
Yeah. And she talks about wanting to protest for the release of hostages who were taken during the attacks.
Right.
But she's really hesitant to do so because of the current atmosphere in Berlin.
Oh, how so?
Well, she's troubled by how Free Palestine chants, which should represent a call for justice, are sometimes being twisted into anti-Semitic slogans.
I see. Yeah, that makes it incredibly difficult for someone like Maya, who supports Palestinian rights, but is also deeply disturbed by anti-Semitism.
Right. It's like she's caught between these two sides that are becoming increasingly polarized.
And that must be a really difficult position to be in.
It is. And it brings up all these questions about how we balance freedom of speech with the need to combat hate speech.
Definitely. And I imagine it also puts law enforcement in a tricky spot.
Oh, absolutely. The blog post touches on that too, saying that now law enforcement is trying to distinguish genuine expressions of support for Palestine from, outright hate speech.
Yeah, that's a tough line to draw.
It is. But let's go back to Jackin for a minute.
Okay.
The blog really goes into how her being stateless impacts her everyday life in Berlin.
Right. We touched on that briefly, but I'd be interested to hear more about the specifics.
Well, for example, she talks about constantly having to deal with bureaucratic hurdles.
Like what?
Things like, being denied access to healthcare or even having trouble renting an apartment. Just basic things most people take for granted.
Yeah, I can see how that would make life incredibly difficult.
It does. And, it makes you think about how Germany, with its history, has this strong system of legal protections from minorities.
Yeah, especially after the Holocaust, they've really tried to address these issues.
They have. But Jacken's case shows that there are still gaps in the system, especially for people who don't fit neatly into traditional categories of citizenship.
It's a reminder that even in countries with good intentions, there's always more work to be done.
Absolutely. But what's so inspiring about Jacken is that even with these constant challenges, she finds strength in protests.
Really?
Yeah, there's this quote from her in the blog that really stuck with me. She says, "It helps me to keep on living. It means I'm not alone.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is. And for her, it seems like protesting is a way of asserting her existence.
Like a way of saying, I'm here and I deserve to be seen and heard.
Exactly. And it's interesting how the blog also talks about her journey of rediscovering her Palestinian identity.
How so?
Well, she mentions that at first she actually tried to distance herself from her heritage.
Trying to fit in and avoid any negative stereotypes.
Exactly. But over the past year, she's really embraced her Palestinian identity more openly, almost like an act of defiance.
That makes sense, given everything that's happened.
Right. And I wonder if being part of these protests, surrounded by others who share her heritage, has played a role in that shift.
Could be. There's often a sense of empowerment that comes with reclaiming your identity,
Right.
especially when it's been marginalized.
For sure. And for Jackin, it seems like it's not just about cultural pride, but also about asserting her right to exist and be recognized for who she is.
It's a fundamental human need, that desire for recognition and dignity.
Absolutely. And it's something that comes up again and again in the blog, this idea that Palestinians in Germany are often dehumanized.
Oh, in what way?
Well, there's this one story that Jackin shares that's really heartbreaking. She talks about overhearing people casually refer to the deaths of her family members as collateral damage.
Oh, wow, that's awful.
It is. And it just shows this complete lack of empathy, like
Mhm.
reducing people to statistics and ignoring their individual lives and stories.
It's that kind of language that makes it easier to justify violence and discrimination.
For sure. And the blog connects this to a wider trend where Palestinians are often seen only through the lens of the conflict.
Right, ignoring their culture, their individual experiences, their hopes and dreams beyond the political struggle.
Yeah, it's like they're reduced to just one aspect of their identity.
And it's crucial to remember that conflicts are never black and white. There are always multiple perspectives and complexities.
Definitely. And Jack expresses this so well in the blog when she simply says, I just want to exist as a human being.
It's a simple statement, but it speaks volumes.
It does. It's about that basic human need to be seen and acknowledged for who you are, regardless of your background or beliefs.
Right. And it makes you wonder, how do we move forward from here? How do we create a space where everyone feels seen and valued?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's something we'll definitely be exploring further as we continue our deep dive into this blog post.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, it really makes you think about the power of language and how it can be used to either dehumanize or to uplift.
For sure. And despite all this pain and all these challenges, the blog post shows how Jackin is actively choosing resilience and hope.
I mean, that's incredible given everything she's facing.
It is. She's not letting these experiences break her. She's channeling them into positive action.
It's like she's refusing to be defined by the negativity surrounding her.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the ways she's doing this is through celebrating life and her heritage.
Oh, how so?
Well, she's got her wedding coming up and a henna party.
Hmm.
And the blog post talks about these events as these powerful symbols of cultural affirmation.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
It's like she's reclaiming her narrative and saying, hey, my life isn't just about this conflict. It's about love and family and these beautiful traditions.
And it's about finding joy and connection, even in the midst of all this turmoil.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that Jackin isn't alone in her desire for peace.
Right, there are plenty of Israelis who share that goal.
Absolutely. And the blog post highlights this through Maya's story, too. She hasn't given up on the idea of protesting for the hostages.
Even though the atmosphere feels so hostile right now.
Yeah. And there's this really powerful quote from her in the blog. She says, even if it's for 10 people, we still have to do it.
Wow, that's pretty inspiring.
It is. It shows her commitment to speaking out for what she believes in, even when it's hard.
It's a reminder that change doesn't happen overnight. It takes courage and persistence.
For sure. And, it also reminds me of something Jackin said in the blog. She talked about how solidarity and protests helps me to keep on living, like it gives her a sense of purpose and connection.
And it's not just about protesting. It's about holding on to hope, even when things feel bleak.
Yeah, it's about believing that a better future is possible and working towards it, even if it's just in small ways.
Like Maya said, even if it's just for 10 people, every little bit counts.
Absolutely. So, looking back at everything we've discussed about Berlin 1 year after October 7th, it's clear that it's a city filled with a mix of emotions and perspectives.
Yeah, a real microcosm of the global struggle to find peace and understanding.
But even amidst all the tension and division, there are these glimmers of hope.
Like Jackin and Maya, they're not giving up on their dreams of a better future.
Right. And their stories remind us that even small acts of courage and resilience can make a difference.
And that's something we can all take inspiration from no matter where we are in the world.
Absolutely. And it makes you realize that, peace building, it's not just this big abstract concept.
Right.
It's something we can all contribute to in our own ways.
Yeah,
Like through the choices we make, the conversations we have, even just the way we treat people who have different opinions than us.
exactly. It starts with those individual actions.
Yeah.
Challenging stereotypes, promoting understanding, building bridges.
And reading this blog post, I kept thinking about how Jaqen and Maya, their individual stories, they're like these little acts of courage that could spark something bigger.
How so?
Well, like Jaqen embracing her Palestinian identity, or Maya, being so determined to protest even when it's hard.
Right.
Those actions, they could inspire others to do the same, to question their own assumptions, or to get involved in peace-building
It's like
efforts.
a ripple effect.
Yeah.
It starts small but can spread outwards.
Exactly. And their stories also, they really humanize this complex issue.
Yeah, they remind us that there are real people behind these political debates and statistics.
Right. And that's something we can easily forget when we're just reading the news or talking about these things in abstract terms.
Absolutely. So out of everything we've discussed, what really stood out to you from this blog post?
I think what struck me most was how it brought all these different voices and perspectives together.
Yeah, it really paints a nuanced picture of Berlin after October 7th.
It does. And it doesn't shy away from the difficult stuff like the anti-Semitism or the challenges people face with their identity.
Right, but it also highlights the resilience and the hope.
Exactly. Like with Jaqen and Maya, they're not giving up on their dreams of a peaceful future.
And that's something we can all learn from, that even in the face of all this, there's still room for empathy and compassion.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Berlin 1 year after October 7th, I think what we've seen is a city grappling with some really tough questions.
Yeah, it's a microcosm of the global struggle to find peace and understanding.
But what's encouraging is that there are people like Jaqen and Maya who are actively working to bridge those divides.
And their stories remind us that even small actions can make a difference.
For sure. So if you're listening to this, think about what you can do in your own life to contribute to a more peaceful world, whether it's having those difficult conversations or challenging prejudice when you see it.
It all adds up. Every little bit counts.
It does. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah.